So good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on the future of education. My name is Monique Barner and I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at the Graduate School of Education and Human Development. We are lucky to have faculty who study the many complexities within education from varying angles. So today we have Dr. Ryan Watkins joining us to speak about ChatGPT and the pros and cons involving education. Dr. Watkins is a professor and director of the Education Technology Leadership Program here at our department. After Dr. Watkins' talk, we invite you to stay for a short question and answer session. As he presents, please feel free to enter questions into the chat box if you have any. So Dr. Watkins, thank you so much for joining us today and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Monique. So for today's topic, we're going to be talking about education and AI. Artificial intelligence, and the most recent release of an artificial intelligence program called ChatGPT, which I assume that most of you have heard of since you're attending this webinar as well. For education, it can often feel like what Charles Dickens described as it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I think that his description goes well into how many of us are feeling about ChatGPT and other AI-based applications that are finding their way into education. Often for the help of education, it was the best of times. But sometimes for such more devious uses, for cheating, for not doing work, not thinking, and the things that we want our students to do. And in those instances, it can feel like the worst of times. But we want to dive a little bit deeper into what these technologies are, how they work, what are some of the positive uses that we can promote as educators, as well as what are some of the things that we should be looking out for and how we can help make sure that our students are using them wisely and for really to their advantage as they go forward through the education system and later into their careers. In the news, we've seen lots of different articles. We've seen it on TV about different ways that ChatGPT, as the newest release of an AI model that just came out last December, and what are some of the things that's impacting on education through its use. For example, there's lots of concerns about students using it for cheating, and there are probably lots of students who have already started using it for cheating. There's concerns about how it changes education in a fundamental way, about what are some of the theories around education that we maybe have become used to in terms of how we teach and how we assess, that we're going to have to rethink because we now have new tools that will allow us to do new and interesting things. But we also have to be aware that some of those things will be misused by our students until we can educate them on really what are the ethics of good practice and how can they really use these tools to their advantage, rather than trying to get around thinking, but how to really help it expand their thinking and push them in new and positive directions. So there are a variety of new tools that are out there. They fall generally under a category we call generative AI because they can generate content. These started to come about over the last few years. Beginning roughly 2018, 2019, with the release of some new tools by Google, we started to see more and more of these models coming out. They can generate text, they can write poems, they can write code, they can write songs, they can respond to emails for you. They can do a lot of very interesting and positive things. They can explain PDFs. So you can put a PDF into one of these tools and ask it questions, and it will respond not just with what's in the PDF, but also bringing in information from the internet to help describe it. For example, it can look at a legal document that maybe you didn't quite understand, and you can ask it questions and it will explain it to you in lay language without all the lawyer talk that was in the original document. It can also generate images. The three images on the screen are images created by AI and AI artists. So people wrote prompts of what they wanted, and they kept working at it, asking the AI to create something a little different each time. until they got to the image that they were looking for. It can also diagnose medical images. So it can look at x-rays, it can look at thousands of x-rays in a matter of minutes. It can do some remarkable things. It can fold proteins for researchers. It can somewhat drive cars, as we've seen in the news. It still has some issues there. It's a very complex task. But there are lots of new systems coming out. Seems like every day, every other day, I get an email with a link to a new system to take a look at. So this is where we are today. Within 3-6 months, we'll be someplace different, most likely. But you can start to see what are some of the capabilities that we're looking at specifically within these generative AI systems where they can generate content. If you haven't seen ChatGPT in action, I have a couple of short descriptions, short animations to show you what it's capable of. So in this first one that I'll play, I just asked it to write a short essay summarizing the similarities and the causes of the French Revolution in comparison to the causes of the American Revolution. As you can see, within seconds, it starts generating text. It starts listing off, for example, that it was a financial crisis and that there was social inequality in France leading up to the French Revolution. And it does this pulling data and information from its model, and it doesn't actually know the meanings of the words it's putting up on the screen, though. It just knows which words, based on probabilities, should go together. But just based on that, which you would think would probably just give you nonsense, it actually can create really interesting text. It's not always very accurate is the problem, but it can create text that sounds very good, follows good grammatical and language, but the content can be suspect at times, but it sounds really good. And a lot of times it is good content. So it's the rare occasion that it isn't the good content that we were hoping for. Here's another example. Let me get to the next slide. And in this second example, I asked ChatGPT to write me a poem about butterflies as written as if it was Winston Churchill writing the poem, just to see how it would do when I gave it another character, in this case, Winston Churchill, to produce the content based on the language model's interpretation of his writing and speeches. And as you can see, again, it writes a poem very quickly, and it's a pretty good poem. So, for example, but let us not despair, my fellow citizens, for we can make a difference, you and I. We can protect our habitats and preserve their lives and ensure they continue. So it can do lots of interesting things. I'll have one more example, I think. Oh, that's the same example. So in this third example, I asked it to outline a presentation. And this might be something we would ask students to do in preparation for a presentation they're going to give in class. And it can quickly go through and outline what would go into a good presentation. In this case, it's on the topic of Chinese investments in the African economy. And it outlines a presentation that you might actually want to give. If not anything else, it will give you ideas that you may switch the order around, add some additional content that you're interested in, but it can get you started, which for students is often very helpful, I find, because there's a certain intimidation that comes with a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen. So we can start to use these types of tools maybe to help get past some of that anxiety and to help people get started. But then we have to figure out, where do we draw the line in terms of how much of the students' thinking do we want to go into it, and how much do we want them to depend on tools like this? Let me get to the next slide. So I should mention that a number of tools have also come out to try to determine if ChatGPT or another language model was used to generate the content. One of those that's gotten the most press is this one called GPT-0. And this was developed by a student, I believe, at Princeton. And the idea behind it is you can put in text. In this case, I put in the response to the first question about the French and American revolutions to see how it would score. It analyzes the text. It looks for certain patterns in the way the words come together. It gets fairly technical in how it looks for the word patterns. But as it starts to do that, it will start to try to determine what are the odds that this was written by an AI system, or if this was actually written by a person, a student. So it comes up with a score, which it calls its perplexity score that you see there in the background. And based on that perplexity score and some of the other scores, it's going to give us odds that it was written by an AI system or a student. So as you can see, in this case, it's fairly certain. It has 81% chance that this was written by an AI system. And we know that it was because we had just seen ChatGPT write this. What I did after that then, though, to see how hard would it be for a student to get around this, I took that same text, I went to a website called Paraphrase.io, which is just a free paraphrasing tool. There are many of these online, and I put the text in there, let it do its paraphrasing. So it changed some words with synonyms here and there, moved a couple of sentences around so that it sounded a little different, and then gave us back the text. So in this case, then, the text is very similar, but it's not the same exact text that was put out by the ChatGPT system. So again, it will go through and it will do its analysis, and it will create the different scores, trying to come up with whether it predicts it's going to have been created by AI or not created by AI. We'll give it just a second to do its thing. And I'll go ahead and share the results with you. They're going to come up on the screen in a minute. It dropped significantly from that 81% confidence that it was AI generated. It's now going to come up and give us a score, if I remember right, of, yep, there it is, 34% confidence. And that's just running it through one paraphraser tool. So the ability of these systems to actually detect what was generated by AI is fairly limited at this point in time. There are a variety of technologies being developed, but it's going to be a game of cat and mouse as new technologies for identifying the AI-generated text come out. At the same time, new tools for getting around it will also come out. So what exactly are we talking about then when we talk about this being a type of artificial intelligence or an AI system? Well, a definition that I like to use for AI came from the former Dean of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. And he said that artificial intelligence is the science and engineering of making computers behave in ways that, until recently, we thought required human intelligence. So as you can see, if this can generate love songs, write poetry, can create videos, can create new art, these are all things that until very recently, we thought only humans could do, and maybe a couple of animals, a couple of primates. But primarily, they required human intelligence. So that's why these would fit into what we would define as an AI type model. Now, there are other definitions of AI where these might not fit within. But within this general definition, they definitely fit within that because we did not expect that our computers could be producing this type of content at this point in time. So the key idea then behind AI is that they can mimic or reproduce certain cognitive tasks that we do as humans, whether that's perception, reasoning, or decision-making, without necessarily being human-like, though, overall in their intelligence. And I think this is an important thing to recognize, that though we call it artificial intelligence, it doesn't mean that it's the exact same type of intelligence that we would associate with human beings. It's a different type of intelligence altogether, but yet it would still fall under that previous definition. And this, by the way, is the definition that ChatGPT gave us when we asked it. So this latest round of technology development really builds on what we call machine learning. And machine learning is a part of computer science where they look at ways in which computers can behave that if animals or people were doing it, we would probably describe it as learning. Of course, they're machines doing it, so it's not going to be the same. We don't truly understand how all aspects of the brain work. And these are machines, and they're doing something a little different than our brain would be doing anyways. But this is the field of machine learning. And the advancements over the last decade that they've made into how they do their computational work have allowed for these new models to be developed and to be able to do the very interesting, useful, and somewhat scary at times things that they're doing. So a specific type of machine learning is the development of these large language models. And these large language models are what we would call neural networks. So that's a type of algorithm that actually can learn, in the computer sense of learning, how to generate information without being told the rules. So this isn't rule-based algorithms where a computer scientist sits down and writes the code and it says, if you see this, do this, or if you get this information, do that. But rather, the machine figures it out on its own. And they do this by feeding it enormous amounts of information. The ChatGPT model was trained on billions of pieces of information off of the internet. So if you can imagine, all of Wikipedia is just the starting place for where it got trained. So it read everything on Wikipedia and brought all that information into its model. And then what it does on the back end is it makes predictions based on how common things are found together. So for example, it can look at which word would follow the predecessor word based on everything that had been written and read into its model. So everything from Shakespeare up to blog posts written in 2020 would be in the model, and it could start to look at what's the probability that a word should follow another word, and it can do that within the context. So as you can see at the example at the bottom, it says the best thing about AI is its ability to, and what word should follow the to? Well, it just looks at the probabilities. So 4.5% of the time, the word that should follow is learn within this context and following the word to. Now, what gets interesting is that it doesn't always pick the highest probability. When they tried that, the models didn't really put out things that made a lot of sense to humans. And what they found was it has to have a little bit more randomness. And how it picks that randomness is really where the computer science gets in. And we won't get into that level of detail today. But this gives you a general idea of what the model is doing. So when you saw ChatGPT reading or writing all that content onto the screen, it was doing this type of calculation, one word at a time, over and over and over again within seconds. And that's really what has brought about another part of this revolution. And that's the new technologies that have allowed it to develop very quickly. So we have much faster processors now. Some of them are called GPUs, and these are graphical processors that were initially developed for gaming, but have become very valuable because they seem to do this type of computing very well. And then they also have what they call tensors, which is a different type of computer chip that allows for machine learning to take place much faster as well. So we have new chips. We have a lot of data storage and big data warehouses. So we have the computing power, and now we have data to start to train the machines on. So we have all the social media data, all the blogs, all the Wikipedias. We have data coming from IoT or Internet of Things devices that can help inform these machines and their models so they can make decisions and make predictions going forward. And there's lots of money supporting all of this. So lots of venture capital money. When you get all of this coming together, what you come out with are tools like ChatGPT. Now, I should note here that what GPT is doing should not be misconstrued as artificial general intelligence. So we are not close to the point where we have a general intelligence AI that will learn on its own and doesn't have to be told what to do, but makes its own decisions about what are its goals and what should happen next. That's way further down the road than this and gets much closer maybe in your mind to the Terminator movies and some of those scarier aspects of it. But that's not where we are. These are still very specific to tasks. They do certain things that are controlled within the computer system. So even though it may look like it has that mimicking of intelligence, it's not really there, and we don't have to worry about it becoming artificial general intelligence within this technology set. But I like to think of the Chinese word for crisis when I think about some of the implications of this in education, because it brings together two characters in Chinese, to my understanding, and that is the character for danger and the character for opportunity. And I think this type of technology brings both, and we want to be aware of both as educators. We don't want to necessarily just focus on the dangerous parts of it and try to keep it out of the hands of our students. We also want to balance that with the opportunities, but we don't want to get carried away with the opportunities and start to ignore the risks, because there could be some real consequences to that too, that would be very negative for our schools and for our students. So we'll start with just a few of the dangers, just to give you a heads up, so you're thinking through what some of these challenges are as your students and you find ways to use this in the classroom. So it does require lots of data. These models are not inexpensive. Estimates are that the ChatGPT model, which is their 4th or 5th model that they've released publicly, and that one costs anywhere, they think, between $30 and $40 million of just computational time. So that's just time of computers and the energy those computers are requiring to do that. So that doesn't even include all the cost of the engineers and the people who built the system itself. There are some dangers too, in that if this does replace searching, if students find that this is easier to use than Google for getting information, what does that change about their search strategies and their critical thinking about what they're reading? So currently, when you use Google, it will give you pages of links to look at. And you have to go into those links and see if it has what you want, compare between them, make some judgments. With this, it just tells you the answer. When I asked it to tell me what were those comparative factors between the two revolutions, it didn't send me to 20 different places to look at different perspectives on it. It just gave me one. And I can take that as being the answer. And that could be a little dangerous if everyone starts relying on these models as being the answers for questions. Because as we saw, they're just using probabilities of what words should pair with other words. And that can be wrong. And it often is wrong. And so that isn't necessarily the way that we want students to learn and to search for information. There are also a number of inherent challenges within the systems themselves, such as the bias. What data did they get trained on? What data did they not get trained on? When ChatGPT was developed, OpenAI, the company that developed it, made decisions about what data to include and to not include. Some of that data we're glad they didn't include. So if they left out some hate speech, if they left out things from pornography websites, some of the parts, though, they may have taken out things that we didn't really want them to take out. And that might create a bias in their model. Now, there will be other companies developing other models, and that's where the competition will come in to see who has the models that works best for our purposes. But we have to be aware that these biases are going to be in all of the models, because someone is making a decision about what to train on and what not to train on. There's also issues of transparency. We don't know exactly how ChatGPT was written. I mean, it's their product. That's their corporate secret. So we don't know exactly how it's making the decisions that it's making and determining those probabilities. And you can't explain it. We don't know why one word is following the other word precisely. We know that it's some type of probability that it's running, but we don't know how that probability is calculated. And so if it says something that is inaccurate, we have no way of explaining why that inaccuracy is there and being able to fix that inaccuracy. We can only patch it up on the outside. There's issues of trustworthy data privacy, data ownership, and of course, there's challenges around the anthropomorphism, it's always a challenging word, of people starting to think of these systems as being human. And it's very tempting to say, oh, ChatGPT told me this, but it's just a system. It doesn't have true human intelligence, and it shouldn't be confused as having it. There are environmental concerns. These systems take a lot of energy to run, and that has impacts on our environment. There's issues of inequality. There's issues of AI alignment, and that's what researchers call for the question of, does AI work toward the values that we as humans have, or is it working towards some other set of values? What happens when AI is reading mostly content that other AIs have written? So AIs can write blog posts, they can write movie reviews, they can write all kinds of interesting things. Right now, there is not that much of that content available online. But as you can imagine, they can write a lot of this content within a year or two. Some percentage of what's available online that future AIs will be trained on is going to have been written by AIs. And in 5-10 years, maybe most of what it gets trained on will have been written by other AIs and not by humans. And where does that leave us? And then there are also questions around epistemologies that we have to take into consideration. But we want to balance that, as I said, with looking at what are the opportunities. So are there ways that the AI systems can lead to better engagement, interactive experiences, simulations? There's a great app for your phone that you can download where you can have talks with historical figures. And you can have a conversation with Martha Washington about some of the challenges of being married to the first president of the United States. It does warn you that the information may not all be accurate, which is a nice feature of this particular app, but it is a very engaging experience to learn about history by talking with someone from history, even though it's not a real person. You can add personalization. Think about the way that chatbots can interact with you in new and different ways. So if you're going to customer service because of an electric bill or something, you might interact with a chatbot and they can answer a variety of questions that they couldn't possibly train one on using prior types of technologies. Accessibility, as I mentioned before, being able to have people access legal forms, being able to access medical information. These tools would be great for being able to understand medical bills or medical diagnoses and being able to translate it into lay language so you don't have to call the doctor to have it re-explained again. It also can be integrated into a variety of tools. So Microsoft, who's a large funder of OpenAI, has already started to integrate this. You may have seen they put it into their Bing search engine. It's had some hiccups. It hasn't been quite a smooth transition as they'd hoped, but it's really exciting in terms of what they're doing. Google is planning to do the same, it appears. Microsoft has said they're going to build it into Microsoft Word, so you'll be able to have conversations as you're writing and to find ways to improve your writing through that. I saw one company that's looking at using it where it will work within a Zoom meeting. So it will listen throughout your Zoom meeting, and then at the end of the meeting, it will write a summary of what was said and who tasks were assigned to, and all that note-taking that we currently have to have a person do during the meeting. So there's a lot of exciting things coming up. For teachers, if we can get beyond some of the rudimentary elements around writing, maybe these types of tools can help us move students to more critical thinking and metacognition as they're working in the classroom, we can offload some of those tasks to the systems and be able to push our students a little further in some very positive directions. And of course, there are many healthcare applications of these and related technologies. If you're thinking about some more specifics of how you can use these types of technologies in the classroom, for example, they're really useful for explaining new concepts. I've already gotten in the habit of having one of these tools available when I'm reading an article. And so instead of having to open up a search engine and look up terms that I'm not familiar with, I just have ChatGPT running next to it. And if I come to a terminology or a concept that I don't quite understand, instead of looking it up or not reading that whole section, I just ask ChatGPT, what does this mean? And within a few seconds, it describes it in a language that I can understand, and then I can keep reading the article. It's very helpful for brainstorming ideas, as I showed earlier with brainstorming about what could go in the presentation. You can do this on any topic. You can ask it to give you 10 titles for an article, or you can ask it to give you 8 different ways that you could use a narrator in a story that you're writing. So there's lots of useful brainstorming. Again, we have to be careful as to where do we draw the line between using ChatGPT to bounce ideas off of and to get ideas, and where does it start doing the work that we're supposed to be doing as students or as educators. You can use it to evaluate your ideas. I really like this concept of using it to offer counter arguments. So sometimes when a student or someone is working on a paper, it might be late at night. You might not have anyone to read it to say, kind of, what are the flaws in my argument? And you could go to ChatGPT and it can do that type of counter argument. It can give you the counter arguments against the things that you're saying. Again, it writes with great grammar and vocabulary. This is actually a weakness for students who are trying to use it for cheating. I had a colleague the other week write saying that she had her first student submit something that was, she believed, clearly written by ChatGPT. She had sent it through the GPT-0, it had agreed. And then through the conversation, I found out how she initially got suspicious of it, as she said, this student never wrote this well before. So again, it writes with really good grammar and vocabulary and punctuation. And that can be a great model, though, too, especially for second language learners who maybe struggle with some of those things. So it can translate text. So if you have text from another language, it's integrated into translation models already, so it will translate it for you. If you're doing academic writing and you want to move all your references into APA or MLA standard, you just give it the basics and it will do the rest for you. It can write computer code. It does a very good job of this. It used the GitHub website to get most of the code that it is trained on, and it does a great job with that. And you can also do things with data in it. So it can do calculations, it can transform data, it can do a lot of interesting things in that area as well. So I think that we'll see this getting applied in many aspects of education. The graphic up is from Microsoft and specifically looking at applications of AI within higher education. And they're looking at everything from student service applications to research, to the types of things we do on a college campus or maybe in a high school in terms of managing clubs, doing data sharing between departments or units, and maybe with any counties or other types of districts where we might share our data. So everything from, of course, academic integrity, it could have impacts on our policies and how we go about trying to enforce academic integrity, to how we give advising to students, whether it's advising about particular courses or whether it's advising about their careers. Also doing student success and how we can monitor and better retain students. It can look for patterns in individual student data and then actually use that to give suggestions for how to reach out. I know that I believe it's Georgia State University. They're already having great success with this type of system, where they have an AI system that is both starting to look at the data and make recommendations for how students can improve their work. And this leads to better student retention for them as a university. But it does everything. It automates the emails even that goes out to the students. And it can do that in a customized way now that it has ChatGPT type of technology available. So I think we have to think not just about one aspect of how ChatGPT and these related generative models are being used currently in education, but think really where they're going to be used over the next year, 2 years, 5 years. And I think it's going to filter its way into many, if not most, aspects of the different things we do within an educational institution. Some of the things that we're doing here at GW is we investigate how AI impacts with education. We're doing research on trust in AI. Some of the things that my students and I are looking at are, for example, what are the factors that influence a person's trust of an AI system and the recommendations it's making? We're doing this both with teachers as well as with others, and looking hopefully at students at some point as well, as to how does their trust of the system influence what types of decisions they then make based on the recommendations of the system. And what are those factors that lead to them having greater or lesser trust of each of the AI systems they're interacting with? We're also looking at AI literacy and what are those core foundational knowledge and skills that people have to have in order to collaborate with AI. So if we think of AI being in the classroom and in the workplace going forward, what are the skills we as people have to develop to really maximize those relationships? What do we have to understand about the AI so that we can get the most out of those systems? We're also being very aware of what are the risks of giving too much over to those systems. And lastly, the third area we're working on is what we call needs-aware AI. And this is looking at how relationships of necessity and sufficiency also get integrated into AI systems. So that's just within the Graduate School of Education and Human Development at GW. And of course, we work closely with our colleagues in the engineering school and in computer science and in data science and in business and in other programs across campus to ensure that we have an interdisciplinary, well-rounded perspective of how AI is being influenced by and influencing higher education. So to wrap, I thought I'd give you some of the things, some of the ideas of the technologies that I'm watching as we go forward. So AI is definitely a hot topic today with the release of ChatGPT and then Bing and Microsoft investing all their resources into it. But there are a variety of similar technologies that we should be keeping our eye on as educators. They maybe aren't quite as popular at this point. They're still a little further back in the development life cycle, but these are things that I think we should be aware of. So there's this area that I mentioned before, the Internet of Things, and that's how we connect devices, whether they're phones, whether they're sensors, whether they're cameras, to the internet, and what can be done with these devices. There's a lot of advancements going in this area. If you think about the doorbells that now have cameras, and those cameras can now use machine learning to actually do facial recognition at your house in real time. And those are devices that you can currently buy today. And where they're going next is they're going to get smaller, lighter. They'll do more of those things on the device rather than being connected to subscription services. Federated learning is another area around AI that we should be keeping an eye on. And this is where their actual learning happens on the machine itself, such as your phone. They do this already if you think about predictive text. So when you start typing a text and it starts to recommend words that it thinks you might want to say next, Well, that's predictive text being driven by machine learning. And some of that is being done on your phone, where it's learning about the words you use most. But some of that data is also being sent back to Apple, and Apple is using that to improve theirs if you're on an iPhone, or it's going back to Google or whoever hosts your platform. So that's what we call federated learning, where part of it is done on the device and part is done back on a large server. Real-time translation is happening very soon. OpenAI in the fall also released a tool they call Whisper AI. It got a lot less press because it's not nearly as easy to use. But this allows for near real-time translation. I think currently it supports 30 languages. So you'll start seeing that coming in more devices. And that will not only allow for communication in those different languages more easily, but just think of all the information that will open up where Chinese text, French text, Russian text, German, all of that will be available to you, and it can be translated almost instantaneously to your device. Other little bit further off, these are probably more close to a decade away, and some of the uses that we'll see. But they are working hard on brain-to-computer interfaces. They already have some of this. Paraplegics can control iPads, for example, and move the mouse around and type, only using their minds, and they're hooked to a bunch of wires at this point, but those wires and stuff will get smaller and lighter and more remote, so that people can communicate with their devices in new ways. There's also then, of course, cognitive implants, and this would allow for computer-to-brain interfacing. So how can you get information from outside of the brain to the inside of the brain? Again, this is fairly far off, though there are large investments by the likes of Elon Musk, Bill Gates. The founder of Amazon has invested in companies that are looking into this. Even as far back as 2018, they have been successful in inserting false memories into mice. So there are a variety of different efforts in this area. A lot of this is related to medical applications at this point in time. But if you can think 10, 15 years down the road, these are the types of things that are going to have an influence on education. And the last one is optogenetics. And this is a way of using light to control neurons. So for example, stroke victims can get back use of limbs. That's where we're headed. We're not there yet. We're still probably a little further out on that one. But these are all things that I think we as educators want to continue reading about, be aware of, that it's not just this round of AI that's influencing education, but it's going to be a whole variety of technologies stemming from it going forward over the next decade. And in the end, I'll just say once again that it can at times feel like it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. And I think that's not a bad thing, that these tools offer us many opportunities in education. And we have to be very aware that there are some negative uses out there, and we have to work with our students, talk with them about these applications, and make sure they know that we know that these things are happening, and we can help them start to build the ethical frameworks that they can use them wisely and appropriately going forward. So that's all that I have, Monique. If you have questions from the audience, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Dr. Watkins, for your informative presentation. So now we will start a short question and answer session. So for those of you in the audience, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We have a few already. And Dr. Watkins, I'll just read them off to you one by one. Great. So given ChatGPT can produce information errors, who is monitoring it and who is in charge of the oversight?
So ChatGPT is currently owned and operated by a company called OpenAI. They were originally a nonprofit, and they still might be as far as I know, but they're heavily financed by Microsoft to the tunes of like tens of billions of dollars. So it would fall under them for oversight. but they are not actively monitoring in the way that you might imagine. So they're not monitoring to see what information is being provided and necessarily what is the accuracy of that. Because it is a model and it's not just a straight database, there's not a real way to fix those types of errors. Now, I did see research recently out of Google where they are proposing another application that you would lay on top of the ChatGPT, and it would go in and correct the errors that it found in the data that was produced by the model. Again, the model doesn't know what the words mean, so it doesn't really have a way of knowing if there's an error in it. It's just putting together the probability of what word should follow the predecessor word. So you would, in theory, have to add this layer of correction on top of it.
Great, thank you. Next question, since the purpose is to, one of the purposes is to mimic human conversation, what are your thoughts on ChatGPT and phishing emails? Do you think the occurrences of phishing will rise?
Unfortunately, I do. It makes writing phishing emails much easier, and it probably makes them more effective since they can be more personalized. And so the more effective there are, the more people will do them because they can make money off of it. And so we'll probably see an increase in that. Hopefully, the email companies will respond by using similar types of tools in order to filter through and try to keep phishing at bay. Our current spam and phishing filters are actually pretty good. But the other worry, I guess, too, is if they just overwhelm the system. If these systems can send out tens of thousands of phishing every day, well, that could overwhelm some of the systems and shut down our email servers as well. So it's going to be a battle going forward, I believe.
Thank you. So similar to self-checkout lines, what are some things you think might make sense for ChatGPT to replace?
One example, I'm not sure if I would say replace in terms of jobs, as much as change what are the skills that we're looking for. So you think a job like marketing, and let's say you're hiring a new marketing person for your nonprofit, and you have two candidates coming in. And one candidate is fluent in using ChatGPT to write marketing campaigns. They practiced this in college. They wrote a variety of different campaigns, and ChatGPT could customize the emails to donors as part of the campaign. And then you have another candidate who comes in who doesn't have those skills. And they can write a good campaign, but it maybe takes them twice as long to implement it or 3 times as long. Well, that's time that they could be doing something else. So I think that the people in the marketplace who will have the advantage will be those who know how to use these tools and how to use them wisely to get their jobs done. So you can imagine that first candidate, if it only takes them 3 hours to do it and it takes the other person 9 hours to do the campaign, well, that gives that person 6 hours of other things they can do to help the nonprofit that the other job candidate won't have available. So I think it's more along those lines where we have to think about how it gets integrated into jobs, and then how do we prepare people to be successful in those jobs, more so than wholesale replacing of the jobs.
Great, thank you. The next one, you mentioned when you asked ChatGPT a question, it gave you the answer. So how does that strategy relate to academic integrity, but also the development of academic thought in individuals?
So in terms of academic integrity, if students are using the answers from ChatGPT as their answers, then that's a clear violation of academic integrity. Now, if they're using it as a starting place because they really didn't know anything and then they were building off of that using their own ideas, then that might not be a violation. If you think about Wikipedia, for example, we obviously don't want our students to rely on Wikipedia and have that be their sole source of information. And nor would we want them to copy and paste Wikipedia articles in and call it their assignments. But Wikipedia is a great starting place if you know very little about a topic. So I often find myself going to Wikipedia as the starting place. So I think within that sense, we can work with students and help them see where they can gain value from a tool like this and where they cross the line. And then that can help them make better decisions about that. As for the second part of the question, in terms of how does that impact on their critical thinking, I think that's one of the major concerns as educators is how do we help our students to think beyond just what one answer is, but start to compare answers and compare perspectives. And we do run the risk of a tool like this, since it doesn't point you to other answers, people will think that it is the right answer and that there is one single right answer, and that's the one the model gave them. When that is far probably from the truth, the model just predicted which words should go well together. So I think we will have to develop a new set of skills within students so that they know how to use this tool along with the other tools to really start enhancing their critical thinking instead of replacing their critical thinking. How that gets done exactly will depend on the context and on our experience. We're sitting at 85 days since ChatGPT was released. I'm not sure if we all have good strategies at this point. But they're coming. I've been reading a number of blogs where teachers are integrating it into their classroom. I've given an assignment or two where I've asked my students to use ChatGPT. Some parts of it went well, some parts of it didn't go well. And so within a year or two of doing this, I suspect that I'll have much better strategies for how I can help students use these as positive tools and avoid the types of ethical challenges that they might wander into otherwise.
Great, thank you. Another question, you touched on this a little bit before, but we have a question. If a student uses ChatGPT for their thesis, wouldn't this situation lead to another form of plagiarism since ChatGPT uses information from other sources like Google, Wikipedia, etc.?
It wouldn't exactly be plagiarism in terms of it copying the information from other sites. Again, ChatGPT and these other language models, they don't contain like the whole words. Like if you think of a database where you might have the whole file as inside of a database, then you could go in and copy and paste the whole words or strand of words out of a paper or a document. These don't work like that. These are individual words. They've been what they call tokenized, and they're put together into a big mathematical equation that says how related they are to other words. So the word, I don't know, the word George might be closely related to the word Washington, more so than it's related to the word elephant. So when it sees the word George, it knows it's a higher probability that the word that should follow is Washington than the word that should follow is elephant. But nowhere is it going to take a whole sentence that says, for example, from Wikipedia, that George Washington was the first president of the United States. It's going word by word. So it's a different type of plagiarism. It's definitely a violation of academic integrity, but you can't think of it quite in the same type of plagiarism like we dealt with up until this point, where we had tools where it would go through and it would scan for sentence similarity and would say, this sentence looks like a sentence found here. That doesn't really work with this new type of model because it's not pulling the same sentences. And if you did the search, if you put in the prompt for the thesis and I put in the prompt for the thesis, it's not necessarily always going to give the same responses either, because this uses something called reinforcement learning. So it actually knows me as a user and what types of responses it should give to me. So though our responses would be very similar based on those probabilities, they would still be somewhat different because of what I've asked it for in the past, it remembers, and what you've asked it for in the past, it remembers. Hopefully that's not too complicated of an answer.
Great, thank you. So we are running up at the end of our session, but Dr. Watkins, we have one last question that everyone wants to know. Is ChatGPT free?
It is currently free to use. It started out all free. Now they do have a premium service where you can get access to it even when the servers are very busy. They haven't announced how long they will keep it free. The estimates are it costs them anywhere around $100,000 to $150,000 a day to keep it available for free. So at some point, they probably will have to start charging for it. If it's any good news, there's lots of models being developed. Some of those models are open source models that will remain free. Even with the prior ChatGPT models, though. So in our research, we used their prior model called GPT-3. And to run an experiment, it cost us under $5 to have several hundreds of responses. So it was very economical to use even when they did charge for it. So I don't think that that will be a major barrier. But since it is free now, I do encourage everyone to sign up for an account. Though I should mention, they do keep and use your data. So if you have data privacy concerns, then you might not want to create a free account. But if you're not concerned about that, go in and play with it. It's a great time to experiment, see what it's about. Start by having it write a song or a poem for you. Maybe give it some of the questions that you've used in class before and see what types of responses it gives back. Using a free service while it's free is a great idea.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Watkins, and also to our audience for your attention on this topic. If you are interested in learning more about the training and education that our school offers, or if you wish to connect with Dr. Watkins, please reach out to us. Our contact information can be found in the emails that you've received, and everyone will be receiving a copy of this presentation. So thank you again, everyone, for joining, and we hope to see you at our next webinar, which you can find in the admissions events section of our website. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Monique.